heat on her collarbone, lies in the walk-in. Kitchens don't sleep, they simmer. When the last table is cleared and the dining room lets its velvet voice fall into a whisper, the building changes languages. Tickets stop printing. Compressors begin their midnight sermons. Stainless exhales the day's heat in long, careful sighs. In the walk-in fridge, the citrus oils sharpen their elbows, and the oyster liquor in the ice bed smells like a rumor about the sea. If you've never stood barefoot on a kitchen mat after service and listened to a room cool down around you, you don't know how loud silence can be. I'm Julian, executive chef at a restaurant that likes to pretend it doesn't care about stars while arranging itself so stars have no choice. My life is a parade of temperatures, a rosary of timers. I can tell you how long a scallop has been wrong by the sound it makes hitting a pan. I know the stubborn valve on the combi that wants to sulk on humid nights. I know what grace looks like plated in the past lights, and what panic sounds like drowning in the dish pit. The POS printer and I share an intimacy I have not always achieved with people. My wife, then, was Nina. She builds rooms that teach people how to feel, not exactly an interior designer, not exactly a scent chemist, a dramaturg for evenings. She can look at a corner and tell it to behave. The first time we kissed, we were standing near the fish market just after dawn, and she was eating an oyster as if it were a secret she'd earned. She tipped the shell to my lips without breaking eye contact, and in that one slippery mouthful I learned that brine could be a promise. We married on a Wednesday in a registry that smelled faintly of floor polish and optimism. After we signed, we walked around the corner and ate bread with butter that belonged in a museum, leaning into each other like conspirators. Nina liked to visit the kitchen after service when she was working on a client's journey. She'd sit on the cold end of the pass, skirt hiked just enough to make my concentration a spectator sport, and taste small spoons as if I were auditioning. She smelled like bergamot wearing a leather jacket. She knew exactly where to put her palm on the back of my neck when I needed forgiveness I hadn't earned yet. I knew exactly where to set my mouth at the notch of her throat so that her thoughts decided to become feelings out loud. We wrote treaties in the language of hands and salt. The first odd thing was the kind of boredom only a chef notices. On my night audit, the walk-in controller logged one door open longer than any human would need to choose a lemon. 32 seconds. Nothing missing on the prep sheet. No rogue temperature spike. Just enough to tug the sleeve of my attention. I shrugged, filed it under ghost, and went back to writing an email to a supplier who had the nerve to call apricots conditionally peach adjacent. 2 days later, the door-open timer recorded 51 seconds. No cook should linger that long in my cold. On the shelf where we keep the charred lemon oil, the bottle was turned 2 degrees to the left. I know because I'm insane in ways that have made me employable. On the low rack, a vacuum bag of marinade lay with a crease it hadn't worn when I closed the walk-in after service. A small thing, the line a bag takes when someone grips it with intent and then thinks better. I did what kitchen people do when a room mutters. I dusted the walk-in floor just inside the door with a whisper of semolina. You won't see it unless you look. It doesn't crunch unless your weight is in the wrong place. I smoothed the top of the lemon oil with a tiny tap. I set a teaspoon just so on the edge of a hotel pan, handle pointing toward the light, and memorized it the way chefs memorize scars. That night Nina came in after the last table left, wearing a white blazer with pockets that liked to keep secrets. She licked a smear of burnt honey from my thumb and perched on the pass. "Your room needs softer chairs," she said. "My room needs fewer unexplained footprints," I said, which is the kind of sentence that sounds like a joke until a certain woman tilts her head the way Nina did then. She lifted 2 fingers toward my mouth, and I kissed between them, She took my breath with the casual expertise of a thief with tenure. "Let have the brave conversation," she said, and somewhere a compressor changed note. "Define brave," I managed. "Open," she let the syllable stand on its own 2 feet. "Not chaotic, not cruel, we write rules, we tell first, we keep each other first. No one on your payroll, no one cutting my checks. Condom is church, our bed is our passport, the kitchen is a sanctuary." "You wrote the treaty already," I said, half admiration, half defensive seasoning. "I don't want to lie," she answered. She had always been bad at lying. "It's part of why I married her and part of why my ribcage tried to be a drum." We drafted the agreement in Sharpie on the butcher paper we used for prep lists. We kissed like people who understood paperwork and wanted to believe in it anyway. I wiped her lipstick off the pass with a damp towel and then put my mouth back where the stain had been because occasionally I allow myself sincerity. In the morning, Semolina told the truth like breadcrumbs do in a story that's sure of its ending. One set of prints, small, the ball of the foot heavier than the heel. They pivoted as if someone had changed their mind twice, then ghosted toward the low shelf. The teaspoon on the hotel pan had migrated a quarter turn. The lemon oil had a new edge as if a fingertip had barely kissed its surface. On the underside of the walk-in handle, the place no one touches unless they're trying to be careful, I found a smear of something dark and glossy that sang under a cheap UV torch I keep for polishing checks. Lipstick. Not the shade that teaches my wrists patience. Another note in a familiar key. I could have swallowed it. I could have pretended my walk-in flirted with physics. Instead, I went into my office and opened the event calendar. The week's calendar had a new name in a font that tried not to try. Quinn Hart, food writer. He'd booked a photo shoot after hours for a feature on intimate spaces of great restaurants, with our PR team's blessing and the kind of contract that gives the word intimate a leash. I clicked his profile. He liked to take pictures of knives posed like ballet and oysters posed like sins. He had the kind of jaw that gets called cut, and the sort of hair that believes in its own silhouette. I disliked him in the way men dislike men who might have reason to be seen with their wives. I asked Nina in the way a person holds a knife they love, carefully point down. She didn't flinch. "I want the thing I said," she told me. "I used the word and then I used it. I didn't keep it out of the kitchen. That part was wrong. I won't break the sanctuary again." Her fingers traced my knuckles the way you trace a scar you intend to keep. "What time?" I asked, hatting myself for being a man who turns grief into a schedule. "Jewels." "Right," I said. "Not the point." She stepped forward, put her hands on my face, and we stood there in the walk-in's echo, cold air making saints of us for a moment before we went back to plating someone else's anniversary. We held for a while. We cooked like professionals and loved like adults. We kissed like treaties. She did not bring Quinn into my kitchen again. We slept with the kind of caution people like us confuse with kindness. Then I found a smear of lipstick, in her new shade, I'll give her that, on the underside of the glass that caps the guard manger's table. A place that has no business reading like a love letter. I cleaned it with a hot cloth and a colder heart. We separated without theatrics because a kitchen doesn't reward people who set fires they didn't intend to put out. She found a loft with windows that ask for apologies. I kept the battered pan I reach for when a sauce needs confidence. She took the kettle that complains before it sings. We hugged at the curb like people who have learned each other's best and worst and prefer to keep the record tidy. "Hate me clean," she said. "If you can't, at least plate it well." I said I'd try. The restaurant forgave me by giving me problems I could solve. A fry station that refused to come back to temperature after a rush. A line cook with hands that wanted to be somewhere else. An herb supplier who used the word curate too close to parsley. Work is a mercy if you know how to hold it. After service, we'd stand in the alley and let the night put fingers in our hair. I'd go back in and fold dough for staff bread with flour up my forearms like the only honest tattoo. And then Camille happened the way a correct pairing happens. Inevitable once you taste it, despite how you resist. Camille runs our wine program. She can make you believe in a grape you think you don't deserve. She smells like stone fruit even when she hasn't touched a glass. In service, she moves through the room like a promise. Precise, not stiff. Warm, not eager. Able to read a table's weather at a glance and decide whether they need a thunderstorm or a miraculously clear night. Her hair lives up because gravity doesn't deserve all the victories. When she laughs, the Zalto stems look as if they've been waiting. We met properly at the host stand after a Thursday that tried to be a Friday. The staff needed bread and a fable. The guests had needed attention. The dishwasher needed a patient God. Camille handed me a glass with the severity of a prescription. "Taste," she said, "and stop narrating the mistakes you didn't make." "Is that the cuvée that smells like apricot after the rain?" I asked, even before it reached me. "It's the one that forgives you for not drinking water," she said, and the glass did exactly that, and I realized I was thirsty for something I couldn't decant myself. We kissed 3 weeks later because anything sooner would have been talent without craft. After close, in the dry storage where flour breathes and spices rehearse arguments, she reached up and bracketed my face with flour dust fingers and said, "Say yes." I set my mouth to the corner where her jaw becomes neck and let my breath count the seconds required to turn a decision into a fact. Her eyes stayed open when she shivered, not because she doubted me, but because she likes to watch the world stay where she left it while she changes inside it. I put my palm to the soft place at the base of her throat, not pressing, never pressing, just resting where a voice begins. That's how I say more when language would be a leak. We were not careless. The kitchen hates careless. So do I. We use the office with the light off and the lock that behaves. The wine cellar with its polite darkness and extraordinarily judgmental shelves. The staff bathroom only when the universe insisted on comedy, and we were willing to be the punchline. We did not use the pass or the walk-in or the garnish station because there are churches you don't smuggle yourself into, no matter how starving you are. We wrote a treaty silently and obeyed it like professionals. If you're waiting for vengeance, I'm a disappointing narrator. I could have called a friendly editor with a portfolio of grudges and given them proof that Quinn Hart doesn't know the difference between an invitation and a boundary. I could have let the rumor mill seat itself in the dining room with a photograph of a lipstick print in a place only certain mouths reach. But kitchens are hospitals for hunger and hurt. You don't work in one and turn it into a weapon without it rusting your own knives. Also, Camille likes me best when my decency and my desire are tied with the same string. Nina and I found a shape we could breathe inside. She stayed on projects for the restaurant because she's excellent, and I'm not petty enough to salt the earth just to make my pride bloom. We texted like colleagues who remember each other's coffee order. She sent a photograph of Basil bullying a windowsill. I replied with the burnished cheek of a copper pan I just scoured back to humility. She wrote, "Proud of you," and the words didn't pretend to fix anything. They behaved like good glassware, held what they contained without commentary. Quinn came to a dinner as if the city belonged to him and he was a generous landlord. He shook my hand with a pressure he's used on 1,000 men, and I gave him just enough of my grip to make him think about whether to rethink how he thinks about chefs who don't look like television. "You run a tight kitchen," he said, eyes already scanning for something he could name before anyone else could. "The room runs itself," I said. "I just remind it." He smiled at the line the way men with columns smile at lines and moved on to let a plate forgive him. A restaurant is a theater that makes edible plays. Every night, new cast, old script, fresh weather. A couple got engaged at the corner table and I sent them champagne because I believe in bribes to the gods. A woman ate alone at the bar and we did not make a lesson of it. We made a meal. A dishwasher cried in the alley and I stood near him with my hands committed to not fixing anything for 2 minutes. A cook burned his thumb and learned the ancient dance of ice and profanity. The oven decided to love me again. The city sent critics and liars and missionaries of their own appetites. We fed everyone, or we tried. I still wake in the apartment above the bakery when the dough is proofing and the building smells like a parable. Sometimes I forget that the bed is big enough for only me, and then Camille's calf is thrown over my thigh like punctuation, and I remember we stopped pretending the bed decides who we are. I put my hand on her throat where it's warm, where breath starts its journey, and wait for the small lift that says, yes, I am here, and so are you. The difference between ending and completion has a temperature. My palm knows it better than my mouth ever will. Months after the powder went back to its shelf with the other necessary embarrassments, we threw a charity dinner for the sort of donors who like to feed strangers for the price of being seen doing it. The room wore candlelight like a high-end lie. I saw Nina by the host stand in a black dress that convinced people they were making good choices. "Is she kind?" she asked me without a name. Kindness is a cuisine. You can taste it without reading the menu. "She's specific," I said, which is the best compliment a sommelier can receive and the best I know how to give. Specificity is kindness in a tool belt. "Be good to each other," Nina said. "Be boring in brave ways." I said I hoped she was letting mourning into rooms that didn't belong to her. She said she was practicing. It looked true. We clinked water because it tells the truth without decoration. Across the room, Quinn laughed at something he'd said, and the table he was at forgave him for it. He could own that laughter. I owned my knives and my name, and the way Camille's mouth curved when she looked at a glass and saw a future. People like morals. Kitchens like Messie and place. I'll give you what I give new cooks who mistake volume for flavor. You carry weight for a living. Some nights that's stock pots and hotel pans. Some nights it's a coworker's grief. Some nights it's your own pride dressed in the wrong jacket. You learn where to put your shoulder. You learn which doors must be sacred. You learn what to do with your hands when someone you love says a word that will change the shape of your life. In the walk-in now, I still run fingers along the shelf edges like a person who pets guard dogs. I check the oil for dust, and the marinade for stories, and the semolina for the jokes it isn't making anymore. I close the door gently because the room has done me enough favors. In the dining room, Camille moves like a verdict you want to receive. In the alley, the smokers pretend they're not outside to feel less alone. In my pocket, a small jar of UV powder rests untouched because I prefer to believe in things without it whenever I can. After service, we eat staff meal leaning against each other like a Tetris level that finally admits defeat. In my kitchen, forgiveness is a maintenance schedule, not a miracle. You stabilize before you scrape. You test before you touch. You keep records, not grudges. You taste the sauce before you add salt. You take your hand and place it where a voice begins, and you tell the truth you can live with. I will keep the rooms that feed us holy. I will not use the knives for anything but hunger. I will mind the doors. I will plate the apology if I have to and garnish it with the smallest possible flourish. And if anyone asks whether kitchens sleep, I'll tell them the truth. They don't. They simmer. And some nights so do I.